Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast. The intention of this podcast is to help you to open your mind, get curious about yourself and raise your consciousness levels. Through these conversations, we hope that you will go on an inward journey to discover the truth of who you are and become the conscious creator of your life. I am your host, Karen Maloney, and I work as an inside-out coach, mentor and guide, helping women to revolutionize their internal chatter and create a life they love. Listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform you choose. And be sure to like, subscribe, review, and share the podcast. Check out my website as well, soulpowerlight.com, for more info. Hello everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining as always for another week. And like every week, I have another super conversation for you today that I'm really excited to share with you. I believe you will get a lot from it as well. But first, before that, I'd like to invite you to join my mailing list. I finally have one. I've had one for a while, but I haven't done anything with it. But now I will be sharing more nuggets, information, stories, tools, techniques, things to help you on your inner journey. And the easiest way to join my mailing list is to go to my Instagram at soulpowerlight.com, and it is linked in my bio section. Couldn't be any easier, so I look forward to seeing you there. Then back to today's guest, and today joining me is Kelli Tennant, and Kelli is the host of the Top 50 podcast, The Kelli Show, and she's also the co-founder and CEO of Soulfire Productions. As a former TV host, she knows what it's like to be the good girl and follow the rules, and she's helping others to break out of this toxic cycle. Kelli leads the way for women to step into their sexuality unapologetically. She guides women into the juicy intersection of spiritual and sexual liberation, challenging them to break free from a lineage of toxic lies and rules. I absolutely loved this conversation with Kelli, and it was so good to delve into some of these topics, and it reminded me so much of my own journey. And although we had extremely different paths, I think we came to a lot of the same lessons and realizations and learnings through our journey. So it was so lovely to connect, and she shares so much really essentially about pleasure, sexuality and spirituality, and how they are all interconnected. And once we connect to our own divine feminine and that sexual nature, how it feeds and empowers us in every aspect of our life. And it's getting used to creating pleasure for ourselves on every level, you know, without having to depend on anyone. And Kelli shares her tool, or something she did, that really helped her to slow down and to be comfortable with just being with herself. And as always, it doesn't have to be sexual. It's all about really being present. And as Kelli talks about, in order to get to that place, we need to feel safe in our body. And that in and of itself is a process. So lots of information here. Kelli talks about how she lived a double life for much of her life, how she lived in her masculine energy and was afraid to be vulnerable or cry, and as an athlete, how she was meant to be a tough cookie, and how she had that controlling type A perfectionist type personality, which again I could totally relate to, but how those things actually really kept her separated from herself as well. So just a brilliant conversation. And she talks about as well, radical honesty is super important when we want to make these shifts, and how people pleasing is actually a form of manipulation. So much in this. I'm sure you'll get lots from it. And if you want to learn more about Kelli's work, her website is Kelli Tennant, and it's Kelli Tennant.com. But as always, I will have everything linked on the show notes on my website, soulpowerlight.com, and click the podcast section. And actually, just a final note before you get into the conversation. When we were recording, actually a massive thunderstorm broke out, and the signal dropped a couple of times. So I edited it together as best I could. So if there are a couple of times where it seems like it jumps or you miss a couple of words, that's the reason. But don't worry, you will fully understand and get the entirety of the conversation anyway. Enjoy! Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining for another episode. And Kelli Tennant is my guest today. And Kelli, thank you first of all for joining me today for a conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Yeah, so am I. From your podcast and bits I was looking at on your work, you talk about some really important and juicy topics, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck in as well and helping listeners maybe to connect to different parts of themselves as well. But first of all, maybe if you just maybe set the scene a little or give us a bit of your background or what brought you to this important work.
Yeah, so I lived with chronic illness for about 15 years. And during that time, started working in television. And so I had this, what I felt was a big TV career in Los Angeles, hosting shows for the Lakers and the Dodgers. And all during this time, I was kind of living a double life. So I had this version of me that was on TV or playing volleyball. And, I put on a show and I was that version of me that was healthy and happy and just so successful and had it all going for her. And then there was this other version of me that was miserable and didn't like herself and was a people pleaser and was really, really sick and depressed and suicidal at times. And so I was living kind of this dual life. And I finally just got so exhausted. My body had kept shutting down over and over again. And I finally got to a point where I had to leave my career. And I just knew that I couldn't sustain this way of being. It wasn't healthy. And I knew that there was something more for me. And I just didn't know what. And so as I was leaving my career and making that transition, I started getting into spirituality and plant medicine and really asking better questions around what it is I wanted, what wasn't working for me, what needed to go, what was out of alignment, and getting really curious about how to heal from chronic illness. And the conversations very much turned spiritual because that's a path I was personally leading. I was working with different shamans and healers all over the world and understanding the trauma response my body was in, which was causing chronic illness, and the different experiences I've had throughout my life that were stored in my body that caused my body to basically revolt against me. And as I got into that journey, I started to learn more about sexuality and my own fluidity in that and my parts of myself that I had been suppressing. And so now here we are, and the show has really become kind of this intersection of spirituality and sexuality and how they mix together and are almost the catalyst for each other in your awakening and awareness and just finding freedom in your life. And it's been a really remarkable, interesting journey, to say the least, but I'm just so grateful for all of it because, as you know, and most people probably listening, every single one of these moments leads you to where you are, and you just have greater concept and awareness of what's happening around you and what's happening within you and how it's all just a reflection of your experience and your perspective.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I actually hadn't realized that you had chronic illness for 15 years. And well, in one sense, not to that level, but I can totally relate to feeling like living a double life. I just felt so conflicted when I look back now at times, just, like you mentioned, that people pleasing, that feeling one way and feeling like having to be another way as well. But something that you mentioned as well that I think is just so interesting that I'd just like to touch on for a moment was when you mentioned, your body started shutting down, or what were the signs that your body was giving you, and what was the point at which you finally decided, okay, I really, something has got to change here?
Yeah, early on, my body shut down. And so I was bedridden after my sophomore year of college for about 6 months, and no one knew what was going on. And I had severe chronic pain. I couldn't see straight. I had brain fog. My left leg went, I couldn't stand up straight, and it was really horrible. And so I kind of went through bouts of that over that entire experience. And then once I had experienced sexual assault in my career with one of my colleagues, and I finally realized how much of an effect that was having on my body and the way I was operating on a daily basis, and how much I was living this lie and speaking so highly of this person on television and then behind closed doors, knowing that I had this experience with them. and just perpetuating this idea that you have to be a certain way and make sure people are happy and make sure everyone likes you in order to have this career, and behind the scenes suffering. And so my body finally hit a point where I was just so exhausted. I think from trying to live like this, I was sleeping 16 hours a day. I didn't shower for days on end, and I had no will to do anything. And my body was just like, we are done. And so that's when I was on leave from work for about 5 months during that time. And then I finally decided to quit my job and move on. And I remember even before that starting, I looked at myself in the mirror one day, probably a year and a half before that. And I didn't recognize myself. And I didn't know how I had gotten to where I was. And that was really scary and eye-opening at the same time, because I hadn't really liked myself for a long time. And I had always kind of seen it, but not really wanted to. It was that like underlying thing that you just want to avoid. And I finally saw it and I was like, wow, I think I was like 27 or 28 at the time. And I'm like, wow, that is terrifying. And I have the ability now as an older woman in my later 20s, not 21, and I can look at this and say, there's something here that I need to look at. And that's when things started shifting for me. And I think that me seeing what was happening around me as being toxic and not okay anymore, because before I was just kind of living in it. I'm like, this is what we do. Like chronic illness is just part of life, and it's okay to feel like shit, and it's okay to hate your life and yourself. And then something switched in me. It was like, no, that's actually not okay. And you don't have to live this way.
Yeah. It's so true. I think for so many people, especially women, but I'm sure men as well, that we really do get into this idea of, we just normalize whatever it is for us. We just normalize feeling a bit meh, or whether in your case, like really awful. And we just normalize living with anxiety or not fully happy or depression or feeling a bit like not worthy or validate ourselves. And, that's why I love having these conversations as well, because there's absolutely nothing normal about that. Again, it's just all the stories that we've created. And, if we get caught in cycles of people pleasing and all this as well. So it comes back to that idea of the importance of knowing ourselves. And how do you support women now as well through your work and your podcast in really, and men as well, I'm sure, but really helping to connect back or really get curious, about who they are?
Yeah, I love this question because it's just so important to me to facilitate spaces and conversations that allow for people to just come back to themselves. I think so much of my journey, I never felt safe to have these conversations, safe to ask these questions, safe to be vulnerable in a way to say, I don't fucking know what's going on and I'm really scared and I need someone to give me guidance or insight because I'm really lost. And I think this was part of the way I was raised, and also being an athlete. It was like, you don't complain unless you're dying, unless you're bleeding to death, don't say anything. And you just fight through it all. And so I was one tough cookie, and I handled everything, and I didn't let people see me cry or be weak. And I think that that's why I feel so deeply passionate about the work that I do now, and want people to feel like they can come to a safe place without judgment and just say, I don't know, or I feel like I might know, but I need someone to reflect back to me what I'm feeling. And one of the things I hear a lot from my community from listening to my podcast, they always say, you put words to the things that I feel that I've never been able to verbalize. And that's what I had been longing for so long. And I found that in a lot of podcasts early on in my journey as well, which changed my life. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. Like someone else feels this. And I think that's the biggest thing. And so I kind of facilitate this in many ways. I utilize the podcast as that space. And so I'm having conversations once or twice a week or doing solo episodes. And I use that time to, whether it's have a guest on or a solo episode, really to teach and to create a space where people feel like they are being seen and heard and held. And I also have a monthly community, and I started it because I realized that that's what I needed when I was early on in my journey. I needed to be around other women who were having similar experiences, who understood where I was and where I wanted to go. And so I facilitate women's circles every month. And then I also bring in different healers that I've worked with to also facilitate and do their work with the group. And so much of it is really just in gathering. I think we are not taught when we are young, and I guess really any time because of the society we live in, how much that community can transform you just in feeling held by the feminine. And I just knew that was missing for me for so long. And I had really difficult relationships with women and bullying and insecurity and jealousy and all the normal stuff. And I just decided I'm not doing this anymore in my life, and I don't want to perpetuate it with anyone else. And so we are to shift the paradigm and vision. And so that's what we do on a monthly basis, as well as a community.
I love it. That is just so important, and doing that work and holding that space. And, you know, I can nearly say in one sense as well, it's why I started my podcast, just to have these conversations and to build a community and connect with other like-minded people. And I'm really curious to know from your side, when you mentioned how you never felt safe and, you know, you were that like tough cookie and, you know, nobody would ever see you cry. And then you mentioned, you know, connecting with other women and community and coming back into the feminine. Do you believe as well that that's, as a society, we're programmed to just be in our masculine as well? That, you know, don't show emotion, keep going, strong, hustle, fight, success, you know, hoard and achieve. And do you think that's a transition that we're going through now as well, to help bring the masculine and feminine in balance, both internally within us and in society as a whole?
Oh my God, yes. Yes to everything you just said. I mean, that is it. Like what you just said is it. What if for 1 second you can just say, everything I learned as a child is bullshit? Let's just look at that for a second. All of these programming and belief systems, we were just given it in our environment, by our parents, by society. And it's like, good boys do this. It's not okay to cry. It's not okay to share how you feel. Keep quiet. Stay small. All this stuff, which so many of us are taught. That is how we operate as adults. I like to think of us as a bunch of like 5 to 7-year-olds walking around in bigger bodies with the same frame of reference and belief systems that we had as children until we finally look at it. And so many of us are taught, and this is for men and women, to be tough and to be in the masculine and to achieve. I mean, look at, you know, the testing that you have to do to get into college and the gold star that you get for, you know, putting your lunch away in preschool properly. It's from such a young age, and it become robotic masculine energies. Yeah, you have women coming into themselves and into their own, and we expect them to be, you know, so feminine and flowy and all of this. We're only taught to achieve and to push through and to be strong. And it doesn't allow us to really sit in and receive and be with it and flow. And I really believe that that's just a product of the system that so many of us are raised in, to keep that feminine strength down. So I think so much of the work I do is supporting women who are perfectionists and controlling and type A and achievers and people pleasers, because that's who I have been my whole life. And you attracts like, right? And we need to know that it's possible to be another way, and then it's okay to soften. And it doesn't mean you're wrong or bad or weak. It's actually a strength to be able to soften and be vulnerable and be in that feminine flow and receiving, so that you can be in pleasure. And that's what we're meant for. And we're just not taught that. Oh,
I swear to God, when you were talking there, it's like you were describing me as well. And that's why I asked that question as well, because that was exactly my journey. When I look back now, I'm like, oh my God, I was so programmed in my masculine. I was so terrified. I did not know what the feminine was. It was like, no, don't lean into that, because that gets you nowhere. That's like intuitive and woo-woo. That's not how you succeed in life. Whereas when I realized that, that's why as well now I work with women as well, to help them, because I truly believe in the bigger picture. This is the transition that we're going through, because everything's energy. And when we're so in our masculine, well then the men, because every man and woman has masculine and feminine energy, and energy always has to be in balance. So when we're way too in our masculine, obviously the men then have to be more in their feminine and different things like this, that I'm like, this is why we've got to the tipping point of where we are in the earth right now, because it's just been all the push, the strive, the achieve, the hoard, the plunder. So it is the rise of the divine feminine. It is to help women to come back into their divine connection, so which will also help men to be more in their divine masculine. So again, they complement and support each other. So I just love all that. And it comes back to, again, another really important aspect of your work, in that kind of intersection between spirituality and sexuality. So do you want to talk to that a little bit as well, and how about the sexuality piece, when that is, I suppose, liberated within us as well, how that supports women as well going forward?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about the divine feminine, how can you not talk about sexuality? And when you talk about being connected to your body, in order to be a sexual being, we actually have to be in our bodies, feel safe in our bodies, and feel connected to our bodies. That's the missing piece, though, is we're kind of bypassing that whole thing and thinking, oh, well, I'm just going to be this like empowered sexual being out of nowhere. And it's like, you don't even feel safe in your own body. You're too scared to even touch yourself or think about what you want. How are you going to have this entire experience that you're longing for when you aren't even present? Your soul isn't even dropping into your body because it doesn't feel safe. And when we explore sexuality, it's not just about, penis and vagina orgasms, though that is what we have been taught for so long. To me, the sexuality piece is so much about intimacy and desire and asking for what we want and receiving pleasure. That is what sexuality is to me. And when you can start exploring sexuality from that lens, your spirituality blows open, because all that is happening is you are allowing more. You are surrendering more. You are more open to receive. And when we open up our womb space, that divine feminine energy, that channel into ourselves, that is when we get more connected into the universe, to our higher self, to our knowing, and to that feminine energy. And when we are connected like that, we feel safe in our bodies and we are truly present, then we experience more orgasmic pleasure and play in our lives. So I really feel like they are so intertwined, and the more one opens, the more the other does. And they continue to support one another, because I know in my experience that the more curious and open and in receiving I have been in my sexual practices and experiences, the more my entire life has blown open. My company has been more successful. I've made more money. My relationship is better. I'm a better leader. I'm a better friend, because I feel free and I feel true to myself. And I believe that I can ask for what I want, and I am willing to invite in that experience of receiving.
Yeah, so powerful. And again, I'm just like nodding to myself going, yeah, this has been my journey as well. But it's so crucially important. And again, but it comes back to breaking old generational stigmas. And, I know in Ireland as well, like, oh, sexuality and sex, and pleasure, it was like dirty, you just did not talk about it. It was just like this dirty subject. And one, that's part of it, breaking the old generational passed on beliefs. Like you mentioned, we're just handed all these beliefs and we just take them and roll with them without ever really questioning them. But then the other part as well that I'd love to touch on, because you've mentioned it a couple of times now, and it is so important, because it does come to that embodiment, being in our body, but feeling safe in our body in the first place. And I think this is huge for a lot of women. And how can you help a woman to start to connect to that process, or start to begin to connect to their body and feel safe in their body?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to this. And what I always like to start with is therapy. I think therapy is transformative, and it has been my experience to be able to process trauma with someone who is a licensed therapist who understands that field and can help you work through whether it's sexual assault or being abandoned as a child or having emotionally unavailable parents, or you name it. There's so many different pieces that we go through that force us to be in a state of fight or flight and not feeling safe in our bodies. And so I think processing in that way and just coming to some understanding of, okay, that's why I feel this way. now I understand. Being able to access those experiences to then get very clear on, this is what's been going on. Okay, now I'm aware of that. Now here are the practices that I can do to begin to create safety in my body and my experience. And for me, one of the most profound things that I ever did for myself was start taking baths. I started taking baths for myself. I lit candles. I put dried flowers in the bath. I did, bath bombs and bubbles, and I played, music that felt really sacred and nourishing to me. And I just took time for myself. And I started to just touch my body. I would just touch my arms and touch my legs and just start to be with myself. And it wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't to accomplish anything. It was just to be. And that was one of the scariest things for me, was just to be with myself without distractions, without putting on a show for a guy, all of these things that we do to keep ourselves kind of locked down. I just started to be with me, and it started to become a self-pleasure practice. So I did start to touch myself in a sexual way, and I would have orgasms in the bath, and it created a sense of safety for myself because I thought, okay, if I can create this dynamic for myself and I can feel really good in this, how do I take this and then implement it when I am with a partner? And how do I take this and know that I can trust myself to create this space and now ask for what I want? And so it really changed everything for me because I knew that I could trust myself to do this for myself. And I also learned what safe meant. So many of us don't know what it even means to feel safe because we never have. And so once you become aware of that and you're in that practice on a regular basis, safety is a word and a feeling that you understand, and you can take it into your life. And that helps you define your yeses and your nos and what you want to lean into and get curious about and what you're not going to, because it's not for you. So it's this long kind of, I wouldn't say linear because it's very up and down, but it's this kind of long process that starts with just creating that experience for yourself. And there's so much that can come from that.
Yeah, amazing. And just to ask, since you mentioned it, what does safe mean to you?
Safe means that I can trust myself and that I know I can always come back to me and I am okay. And I don't rely on anyone else or I don't rely on anyone else and I am not affected by anyone else in the way they are. I am completely sovereign in my experience and I am not penetrable to any energy that I choose not to receive.
Amazing. That is so epic. And, I love that because when we do get to that place of feeling sovereign within ourselves and feeling our true value and true worth, which again has nothing to come with ego and like, oh, I'm better than you and I look down on you. It really comes to that just pure alignment and trust and inner knowing that, like you say, if there's something that, whether it's a comment towards you or something like that you don't want to penetrate, it's just like, oh, okay, that's totally fine. There doesn't have to be an argument. It's like, okay, that's fine, and I think and I know for me, when I look back, that was a really difficult thing to grasp, to think, what? I have that power to actually not take things personally or kind of be really honest and know my value and my worth. So knowing that truth of ourselves is just so important. And for me as well, I know it came back to getting really honest with myself. And I know that's something you work on as well, that radical honesty, because deep down we know. We truly do know, but I remember back in the day, like I'd be telling myself stories like, oh, but what if I don't get another chance? Or, oh, I really want them to choose me in that. So how for you does radical honesty come into your work as well with women and helping them, I suppose, know their true worth and value as well?
Radical honesty is everything, because I think most of us are lying to ourselves, and it's not that we're consciously doing it and we're saying, oh, okay, I'm going to lie to myself now. No, it's this subconscious thing that we do in order to protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe. And what I always ask of myself and anyone that I work with is to ask better questions. When you ask better questions, you allow yourself to be more honest and you allow yourself to be more curious about what's coming up for you. And I think that it's this self-discovery that is so many layers beneath what many of us are taught.
Yeah.
We kind of have this surface level, base level idea of who we are, and we just stay there. And that's the robotic thing we were talking about earlier. And that feels okay. And that's kind of the standard of society. But in order to get to know ourselves and really advocate for ourselves and ask for what we want and speak up for the desires we have to do some excavating. We have to, one of my girlfriends calls it an enema of the soul. You got to go in and you got to clean that shit out.
Yeah.
And you got to get really clear on who you are and what you want. Does that mean that today I say one thing that I want and it can't change tomorrow? No, I'm ever evolving and my truth is ever evolving. But being able to ask yourself questions and be truly honest with yourself if I'll always say this in my circles that I'll facilitate, I say, write down the thing that you are so scared for someone else to see that feels so profound and so true for you. And if anyone saw it, you might throw up. That's radical honesty because we're so scared and we feel so much shame around the things we want and feel and need and desire that we're like, oh, just kidding. I'm not going to even look at that. Well, if you allow that to come up and you really recognize it, and my boyfriend always says, feel what you want to feel, that is radical honesty. Does it always feel good? No, but it sets you free.
Totally. And it comes back to what you were saying earlier as well, how, you know, when you say like that thing that we all hold, like that we feel so shameful about, and oh God, if someone knew, you know, it comes back to that thing of feeling so disconnected from ourselves and from everyone else, and feeling like, you know, maybe nobody will understand, or you feel like you're the only one who's gone through something. And that's the power again of community, of talking to someone, of hearing other conversations where people are talking about different things, that it's like, oh my God, no, I'm not the only one in the world, you know? And I know that was part of my journey as well. And coming back for a moment as well, because that's a really important step as well in getting honest and learning to connect to ourselves and learning to voice our desires or wants. And I know for me, that was a huge, scary process. And I had to start with something that seems really small, like learning to say no. Like truly, if I didn't want to, I'd just be like, no, thanks, without having to over explain. I'd just be like, thank you, but I can't this time. And then all these stories in my head of, oh my God, they're going to think I'm the worst person in the world and all this. And most times they'd be like, okay, that's fine. And I was like, what? And I think that comes to the honesty as well, kind of debunking our own stories that we tell ourselves, that if we do X, thing is going to happen and it's going to be horrendous. So how do you break it down as well for people to help them to start that process of really getting honest, or maybe taking small steps in voicing their opinion or whatever it is that's something that's important to them?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's calling yourself out. Because here's the thing, being a people pleaser is actually incredibly manipulative. And no one wants to hear that, but I'm going to just say it. It is. Because what you're doing is manipulating people to think of you and look at you in a certain way. So I'm going to take care of you like this and do this for you, but it's not unconditional and it's not without expectations, because I expect something from you of return. And that is to validate me, give me attention, make me feel good, blah, blah, blah. So that's manipulation. So you're actually being incredibly narcissistic in a way when you make everything about you and you say, like your example is something I've experienced so much, because I feel like our brains have operated the same way. I'm like, oh my God, if I don't go to this thing, they're going to be so upset with me and it's going to be a whole thing and blah, blah. Wow. Could you think about yourself a little bit more? Like, do we think that other people don't have lives and are doing their own shit? We are taught to be so sensitive and make everything about us. And most of the time it has nothing to do with us. And even if someone does get upset, that's not your problem.
Yeah.
We are not in control of other people's reactions to us, no matter what it is. Everyone is a sovereign being with free will and choice. We like to play victim though.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. Stepping outside of victimhood and realizing that we have responsibility for everything in our lives and we get to choose the experience we are having at all times will free you from people pleasing and worrying about what everyone else is saying. And it is just a choice, and it is a transformational choice that will free you from this paradigm that you have been stuck in for so long. And I feel like that may be harsh for some people to hear, but I also believe in radical honesty, like I said before. And if you're not going to be honest about the way you're acting and the way you're making things about yourself and the narcissistic tendencies that many of us have, especially now with social media and all the things, then you're never going to be able to transform this. It's going to be a constant state that you are in. I believe you make the choice, and you continue to make the choice every single day to do what is best for you and to not worry about everyone's responses. And that practice every day, little by little, shows you don't need to be a people pleaser. And then it was basically a farce the whole time.
Oh, yes. I agree 1,000,000%. But again, I think it comes back to the old, beliefs and conditioning and the way that we're brought up is, we're often, well, I know for me, in my case in Ireland, it's like you give to get. And that is such the wrong message, even when it comes to love. Like, we don't go into a relationship to get, but this is the mentality, or this, again, it's unconscious. But these are the kind of unconscious beliefs that we carry going into a relationship. Like you say, people pleasing, doing something. It's like, well, silently, I'm keeping score, so you have to owe me back down the line, and like you say, that's so not the way to go about it. Genuinely, we should want to do something because we want to do it, not because of the expectation of what we might get back in return. And that comes into, like you're saying, that sovereignty, knowing your truth, knowing whether it's truly a yes for you or truly a no, and both are fine, and not worrying about the other person's reaction. That is the work. That's the inner mindset shift, seeing all these things and shifting them, all these old beliefs, because like you mentioned as well, they are unconscious. We don't go around consciously thinking of this, but this is what's happening below the surface. And just dipping back to pleasure again for a moment, because obviously that's a huge aspect as well, I believe as well, for women to really come back into their divine feminine, is to connect to more pleasure. And again, sometimes that word, a lot of people might connect just pleasure with, in the bedroom and sex. But no, it's all encompassing, like all day, every day, finding pleasure in simple things. So what is your process, or how do you help women to kind of expand their vision on pleasure and what it is?
I think it really starts with trusting yourself and asking how much you are willing to receive. So many of us don't believe that we are worthy of receiving, whether it's pleasure or money or success or anything. And having a conversation around your worthiness and your value and the direct correlation you have with receiving pleasure is so important. So really getting clear on what that looks like. And then it's starting with yourself. How are you creating pleasure for yourself? We as women have to get comfortable with creating pleasure for ourselves and not relying on someone else to create it for us. And that goes back to moving from the victim, oh, help me, please do this for me, into the, no, I fucking own my pleasure. I own my orgasm. And if you want to meet me there and also participate in this lovely experience we're having, then great. And if you don't, then that's, your experience, and I don't need to engage with you. And I think the more that we are open to receiving pleasure and creating pleasure in our own lives, and pleasure can be a million things. I find great pleasure in dancing in my kitchen with my dogs. It brings me the most joy, and it puts me in such an incredible embodied state, and I feel so safe, and I feel so playful and so fun. It creates massive pleasure, and the domino effect of that is that my sex life is better because I am present in my body and I am full of joy, and so I can be more present in any sexual experience because of it. There's a direct correlation. So it's, how do you bring pleasure to your life? Maybe it's drinking a cup of coffee slowly on a balcony overlooking the ocean in Mexico, and that brings you immense pleasure. Maybe it's just walking your dog and being out at the park. Maybe it's just taking time in the quiet, reading a book by yourself. There's so many ways to create this dynamic for ourselves. And then as you get more comfortable in creating those little moments that have nothing to do with sex, so you think, then when you go into the bedroom, that ability to receive and to feel pleasure in every part of your life is then amplified in the bedroom. And we feel more comfortable being in that space and receiving it from every angle.
Yeah, so powerful. And I love how you just put it all full circle again, because it is. And I know for me that receiving, and I think it's a huge feminine thing as well, that being able to receive. And I know that was huge for me because, again, whether it was being in my masculine or the Irish mentality as well, I'd always be like, no, it's fine, I'll do it. And, helping the guys or taking things off them to carry. And like, no, that's totally taking them out of their masculine and everything. So that receiving is huge, 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 and still something that I, work on consistently, but so important. And as well, I love how you mentioned, like, I own me. We all own each other. We are the best authority over ourselves. And it comes back to a word that's mentioned time and time again on the podcast, and it's self-responsibility. We are responsible for our happiness, our love, our orgasms, like everything you mentioned. By knowing it within ourselves first, then it can be heightened by connecting with another as well, or the simple pleasures as well in life. And I think, like you mentioned as well, with taking baths and slowing down and taking time, like slowing down is a huge one because that helps the process of being more present, being more connected to your body. So epic. I just loved the conversation, and you reminded me so much of my own journey as well as we were talking. I was just like, oh my God, yeah. But it's been such a pleasure as well connecting, and please share where people can find more on your work.
Oh, thank you, Karen. This has been lovely. I so appreciate it. If anyone wants to connect with me, I'm active in the DMs. Feel free to message me. You can find me on Instagram at Kelli M. Tennant. And then my website is kellitennant.com. And I have a few different offerings on there if you'd like to work with me. But yeah, thank you again. This has been a really beautiful conversation. And I am sure your listeners get so much from you just sharing yourself so transparently. So thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get notified every time a new show is released. Get more information on this week's guest as well on my website, www.soulpowerlight.com.